All right, so this week for 717, there's a bunch of different questions, not many of which have a lot to do with the topic from Sunday night, which is totally fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to answer a few of them this week and a few next week, just so that we have time. Each video, we don't want to make them longer than 4 or 5 minutes. So for this week, I'm going to answer a couple of questions. First of all, there's a couple of questions from the book of Judges. One is the question about Judges 11 and this very awkward situation where Jopthas sacrifices his daughter. And the question is, why did God accept that sacrifice? And the short answer is, I don't think God did. I don't think God ever wanted him to make that offering. I don't think God approved of the offering, nor did I think God wanted him to keep his word on that offering. We aren't told in Judges. In fact, the book of Judges ends with a very important statement. It says at the very end of the book, "And therefore, since there was no king in Israel, the people of Israel did what they thought was right in their own eyes." And so I really think Jopthas, along with several other examples in the book of Judges, reflect a people totally disconnected from moral truth. And no, I think Jopthas' offering, we're told what happens, not because God approves it. We're just told what happens. And so I think Jopthas kept his word to keep from being embarrassed, but he shouldn't have ever made the statement, nor should he have completed his offering. He'd have been better off doing a million other things. So I don't think God accepted his offering. I don't think God wanted him to do that. I think it's recorded for us matter-of-factly that it happened, but it's a disaster morally. God never endorsed that kind of child sacrifice stuff that Jopthas participates in there. Number two is, what does Shibboleth mean? Well, you know how the people in Texas, when they're going to talk about a group of people or talk to a group of people, they'll say, you guys, or, say y'all. If you're in New York, they'll say, yous guys. Well, it turns out between the tribes of Israel, there was a way of saying this one word, Shibboleth, that was pronounced differently depending on which side of the river you lived on. And so when one of the tribes tried to sneak across into the other tribe's territory, they would check them at the border and ask them to pronounce this one word. And the way they would pronounce it, they would mispronounce it. And so it became a shibboleth, is a password or a code word that based on your pronunciation of the word determines whether you're really in the group or not in the group. I'll give you an example of this. Again, you guys, or y'all, or you all. That might be one. In Texas, we might say a different phrase than, say, someone who's a Yankee, a Northerner. And so because of that, the speech different and different patterns. We see this in America all the time. I remember I was on the phone talking to someone from California, and she answered the phone and said, "Oh, such a sweet Southern accent," with reference to me. I don't think I have that strong an accent, but it was that distinguished for her. So that's what a shibboleth is. It's a different way of pronouncing a word, and it became a password to know whether the person was in the group or not in the group. All right, so that's two from Judges. How about this question? Did Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John live at the same time of Jesus? The answer is yes. John Mark would have been a young child during that time, but Matthew was one of the disciples of Jesus. And so Matthew walked with Jesus, hung out with him. John also was one of the apostles and would have lived during the time of Christ and lived with Jesus and hung out with him for 3 straight years. In terms of Luke lived during the time of Christ, but it seems as though he doesn't come into faith until about 20, maybe 10 to 15 years, 20 years after the resurrection. But he would have been alive during the time of Christ. So all of the gospel writers lived at the same time that Jesus lived, and then thereafter his ascension. All right, so there's a couple of other questions here that involve interpretation issues. One is, let me deal with one more broad question. What is fundamentalist Christianity? Well, the word fundamentalism comes from a group of articles published by Princeton scholars, Princeton professors in the early 1900s. And the collection of articles were put together in a book called The Fundamentals. And from this, the fundamentalists were people who believed in the fundamentals of what these articles asserted. And it's hard to imagine Princeton in this regard now, but in the early 1900s, Princeton was the conservative bastion of evangelical Christianity, conservative bastion of Orthodox Christianity. They believe firmly in creation. They believe firmly in the Bible. And I have the book on my shelf. I should have brought them, but it's a 4-volume set. You can buy them at Amazon.com or you can get them at ChristianBook.com. It's a 4-volume set. It's a series of articles written by these Princeton professors over several months, and it's basically an affirmation of Orthodox and historic evangelical Christianity. And it's written, ironically, Princeton defending these positions in contrast to Yale or Harvard or one of those other schools. So the fundamentalists were people who believed in the fundamentals that were identified in those series of articles. That term has since evolved in the etymology of the word to come to mean those who hold stridently to a dogma within a religious system. So even Muslims are referred to sometimes as fundamentalist, or you might have a fundamentalist Hindu or a fundamentalist Christian. So ironically, what was written as originally a series of articles to affirm fundamentalist Christianity, the fundamentals of Christianity, has now become a broader term in the etymology of the language to mean all people who adhere strongly to a series of religious beliefs without wavering. And so fundamentalist Christianity means those who tend to be more strident in their faith. I probably fall in this category, honestly. I believe the Bible is true. I believe that God created the world. I believe Jesus really rose again from the dead. I believe there's only one way to God through his son, Jesus Christ. I believe that the Bible really is the final authority on life and is true in all that it affirms, that it's historically accurate. All these kinds of things would make me probably a modern-day fundamentalist. I would just prefer, I don't like the label because it usually means you're also rude and mean, and I'd prefer not be either of those. All right, there's a couple more questions. One about an interpretation of 1 Timothy 2:13 through 15, and one about reconciling Acts 9 and Galatians 1. I will answer those next week because we have so many this week, and I want to keep the videos at a shorter length. So anyway, those are my answers for this week. We'll see you guys on Sunday night, 7/17.